As a leader, you have to really know yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And confident leaders, people who have true inner confidence, are okay with themselves, with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, staying positive is very important. As a leader, it's you better be very careful about complaining and getting negative because emotions are contagious.
All right, good morning. It is awesome to be together again, and I've been excited for several months since we were able to book Colonel Lee Ellis to join us, and I've really been anticipating this. He's the author of two books, Leading with Honor, which goes into a lot of detail of his experiences in Vietnam, and then his second book was Engage with Honor, which really translates a lot of those experiences into leadership lessons. And they are fantastic books. If you don't have them, I would encourage you to get them. They will really resonate with this group because I know how much all of you have talked about these leadership principles over the past year and a lot of the things we've learned from various speakers. And we're going to get a bucket full of leadership lessons this morning from Mr. Ellis. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Lee, and let you tell us a little bit about your journey from University of Georgia, go Dogs, and and everything that's happened since then, and the lessons you learned along the way, and some of the people that inspired you, and what you're teaching now.
Well, thank you, Randy. It's great to be with you all. This is an impressive group from what I know about it. Randy has shared a few things, and I'm just honored to be here with you today. And, you know, as leaders and people who are interested in leadership, I know that you're influencing people. Everyone is influencing others, and leaders especially have a lot of influence. So to be able to share with you and to know that you're out there making a difference in other people's lives is very important. As we go through today, I'll be telling stories. Well, let me go ahead and can you share screen and I'll bring up, I have a good many PowerPoint slides, but in case there's any Army guys watching, relax. Most of them are pictures, not a lot of reading to do, so I think you'll be fine. All right. Some lessons in leadership today. You mentioned the book, Randy. It really, the story from the POW camps is really, in my mind, all about leadership because leaders helped us to endure that and to live through it. I mean, we were obviously had our own grit and determination, but our leaders really helped us, inspired us. And they set the example, and that was so important. So we'll be talking about courageous leaders, teamwork, resilience, and mission success. Well, you mentioned the coming out of the University of Georgia 3 days after I graduated. I was in flight school, and 53 weeks later, I got an assignment that said F-4 Phantom, Pipeline, Southeast Asia. That was August of 1966, and the war was building up. So most everybody who got a fighter was going to go through combat training and go straight to the war. And that's what was. That pipeline over to Southeast Asia was the combat training. Do you see the F4 on the screen now? Okay. You're shaking your head, Linda. Thank you. Good. All right. Well, I was assigned to George Air Force Base out in Southern California to go out and get my training. And that was a great place to fly. It was out in the high desert, about halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. I actually took this picture with the latest in technology, a Kodak Instamatic. Some of you are old enough to remember an Instamatic. It was about this big, and it was the first camera that you could really put in your flight suit, the lower pocket on your leg, and carry a camera with you. And I said, I got to take a picture of this because this is such a great, you know, here I am 22, 23 years old, 23, and I get to go do this for a living, and it's something I've always wanted to do. We did everything they did in Top Gun, plus the air to ground. So you just can't imagine how exciting it was, but it was all for a purpose because we were headed to war. Now, this shot shows me out in front of my F4 there. Let me back up. I hit the wrong, I'm trying to drag this out of my way here. There we go, down at the bottom. this was kind of our hero shot. Now, most of the guys would have the hero shots and send them back to their families. And I did that. I was single, 23 years old here, off in Da Nang, Vietnam. I wasn't married, but I had girlfriends, so I wanted to send them a copy, so let them know I was thinking about them and maybe they'd remember me. Well, the good thing is, when I got home, they were all married. Okay, and they were nice folks, but they weren't the right one yet. And I was going to meet her after I got back, and I'll try to mention that a little bit later. A big part of this photograph for me is kind of knowing yourself. And as we think about knowing yourself, and that's chapter 1 in the book, as a leader, you have to really know yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And confident leaders, people who have true inner confidence, are okay with themselves, with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, we may be not like the ugly, and we may be working on the bad, but at least we know it and we acknowledge it and we work on it and grow and take our people with us. That's what I try to do, and that's what I encourage people to do. Well, I knew myself pretty well in a lot of ways because by personality, by skills, values, everything, passion, I was right where I needed to be, which is very helpful when you get in tough situations like being locked up as a POW for years. But in that POW experience, I got to know myself a lot more because there was lots of time to reflect, hours and days and weeks to sit in a jail cell, a prison cell, and think about your past and your future and where you were today and how you could become a better person, correct some of those faults from the past and grow out of that. And if somebody in the Q&A will ask me a question about that, I'll tell you a little story that happened a few years ago. So that was kind of where we were. And this F4 particular one, I happened to have a picture taken in Vietnam. This airplane was painted up with those stripes because my squadron commander was a guy big on PR. He was a great pilot. In fact, he shot down a MiG over there and a great guy, but he was also a big PR guy. So he was trying to get a lot of PR for our wing, and he had somebody paint the wing commanders and the group commanders airplanes up with these victory stripes from World War II, Korean War type thing that they did. And so this particular airplane was the group commander's airplane, and that's actually the airplane that blew up over enemy territory that I was flying in the day I went down. So I actually have a picture of it back when it was looking good. It's Bravo Bravo 600 is the number on it. And this particular picture is actually taken somewhere over Vietnam or Laos. There you can see the mountains in the background. Well, I was shot down and captured, blown up there over enemy territory on 7 November 1967. I just turned 24 years old and was captured almost immediately. The trip to up north was 2 weeks. And in that time period, we were bombed 3 times by American air power. And thank goodness there were foxholes and bomb shelters to crawl into. And maybe the guys missed their target. I was praying they would those days. The Navy and the Air Force bombing us along the way. We traveled mostly at night, though. And the real fear, though, was the local populace that got all riled up. Of course, we've been bombing there for a couple of years, so you can imagine if, Kansas, Missouri farmers caught a Russian pilot had been bombing them for 2 years, they wouldn't be happy. So they were coming after us, but they were especially riled up and like a pep rally by the local Communist Party leader in the village. So the good thing was I had a staff sergeant probably, I'm guessing, young guy, in charge of taking me north. And he was a really good soldier, and he was supposed to bring us in alive. And he really protected me. He and his soldiers protected me much better. I mean, I got hit a few times, but much better than the other guys, friends of mine, were protected in their travels into the Hanoi Hilton. Now, this is the Hanoi Hilton complex. This is a French prison built in the 1890s. The highlighter there you see actually highlights the walls. It occupies an entire block in downtown Hanoi. And there are various segments of that prison. But the top left-hand corner, you see it says Little Vegas. Now, you have to name things, and one of the early guys named it the Hanoi Hilton. Humor is an important part of people who deal with tough situations. If you ever go into an emergency room in a hospital, you'll notice somebody's laying there bleeding and falling apart, dying almost, and the doctors and nurses are cutting jokes across there because that's how they deal with the stress and the pain and the sadness of what they're dealing with. Well, POWs were the same way. So the Hanoi Hilton in Little Vegas, as I'll show you in a minute, we had various compounds or cell blocks in there, and they had names from the old casinos in Las Vegas. Now, there were some tough times there. In fact, it was very tough. Over on the right, you'll see New Guy Village, and that was the end processing where people are usually tortured and broken. Now, I stopped at a midpoint, so to speak. It wasn't quite midway, but time-wise, it was like a midpoint. And down in Bend, it was a bamboo cage prison, and there were 3 other guys there when I was there, and it was kind of a collection point. And so we had a one-armed bandit there that was mean as a snake and was going to break us there before we got to Hanoi. So we went through something there, but even before we got to Hanoi. So that's a little background on the Hanoi Hilton, and that was going to be my residence for the next 8 months. And then I came back to it later in the war and spent almost 2 years there toward the end of the war. Well, as I said, there were those cell blocks. You see Thunderbird there, and that red arrow is pointing to, you see that? Everybody see that? The one that says stay positive? Okay, good. Lesson 3, chapter 3, stay positive. Well, the cell was 6.5 by 7 feet, and it was maximum security. It had no walls adjacent. It was a space between us there, so we weren't touching any other wall. And I guess they did that because they figured out we were tapping on the walls in some sort of code. So this particular cell was set up so it had no common walls. Staying positive is very important. As a leader, you better be very careful about complaining and getting negative because emotions are contagious. If you haven't read the famous book, Primal Leadership on Emotional Intelligence, you absolutely should. It came out around 2003. And knowing that, I have to, as a leader now, I have to coach myself about staying positive sometimes because I can be a little critical and when things aren't going my way. Our leaders did stay positive, and they were also, as you'll hear later, very honest about what was going on with them and where they were in that. Well, in that 6.5 by 7 foot cell, it wasn't just me. Now, 6.5 by 7 feet is like my wingspread of my arms is 6.5 feet is about 6 inches longer than that, and 7 feet deep would be a foot deeper than that. And there was me and 3 other guys. Now, in this little cell, picture 6.5 by 7 feet is like a gas station in some little town out there in Kansas or Missouri in 1950s, a little bathroom. Well, it wasn't, it was our living room, it was our bedroom, it was our dining room, it was everything, and it was our bathroom. And we had a 3-gallon bucket, and thank goodness it had a lid, and we got to empty it every morning. So that was the world that we lived in for the next 8 months. And then came the pressure to collaborate with them, first of all, to share information, and they wanted us to fill out a 3-page biography. Well, almost everybody except one person I know was tortured who refused to fill that out, was tortured, and eventually we agreed to fill it out. They could make you do something, but we always resisted doing anything that would give them anything that they thought they wanted. We did not want to go along with them. So after torture, I'm laying in a filthy interrogation room in leg irons and handcuffs and crying like a baby because I felt so unworthy and so worthless as a soldier who could never wear the uniform honorably again, having been beaten by the enemy. and not being able to live up to the full code of conduct because I'm not supposed to give them any information other than name, rank, service number, and date of birth. Well, at some point, what we realized later was you have to give in and give them something. So there was nothing true on that 3-page biography except my father's first and last name because I was hoping to write a letter someday. I did write a letter when I'd been there for 2 years, so that made me write a 6-line letter. And then at 2.5 years, I got a 6-line letter from my folks. I'm sure they held it up for that long just to make sure there was nothing coming through that would help us in short term. So staying positive was very important, and you had to work at it. There was a lot of fear that first few months, especially. I had nightmares at night a lot of times. But the human being is very adaptable. We learned that emotionally, physically, and mentally, we were very adaptable. Now, we were pretty healthy people to start with. Physically healthy, we were almost all air crews. Physically healthy, mentally pretty strong, and emotionally pretty strong. And then having a community there that we were able to connect with, even though they were trying to keep us isolated, made a huge difference. And I'll talk about that as we go through. So you can see around, you see up in the top right-hand corner, you see the Mint. Those are solitary confinement cells that are about 4 feet wide and 7 feet long. And I had some friends that were locked in those for a few months, and sometimes in leg stocks, leg irons, or stocks where they're actually bolted down, their ankles are locked down to the wooden bed or concrete slab. The Desert Inn was also on the right there, was small cell blocks, 3 to 5 guys. The tet room down below was kind of we call it quiz, more of an interrogation room, kind of a quiz room where they check your attitude and lecture you a little bit. And the Stardust down the bottom right was also cell block. And then Nobby rooms were torture rooms. There was a combat, we called him combat medic because he wore a combat helmet and a white smock, but all he had was some aspirin and some sulfur pills for diarrhea, and that was all the medical care we got for many years, and that was only occasionally. The Golden Nugget was some transition, 3 transition cells there, and I'll mention that again also in a minute. So staying positive, very important. Even though things are difficult, you have to look at a way, how can we work this problem and believe that we can get through it. Optimism was the number one reason for our resilience there. Guarded optimism, not crazy, we're going home tomorrow, but guarded optimism, grounded optimism, some of them call it, is the Stockdale paradox. You never give up hope of a good outcome, but you have to deal with the brutal realities of the current situation. And that's where we live that every day, even though nobody ever said that to us. We'd never heard it. We found out we had to guard our character, obviously, because we all could be tempted. And everybody, it's easy to want to rationalize your way out of things. Well, I had one cellmate who happened to be our senior ranking officer who started collaborating with the enemy. He was a lieutenant colonel, as a matter of fact, had flown in the Korean War. He was a squadron commander, but yet in that situation, there's a lot of background to this, okay? He had some baggage. He was an orphan and had lived in orphanages growing up. So he was an insecure person. So he started rationalizing and agreeing with the communists. He had also gone back to very liberal school, I say liberal school, but gotten a political science degree from a university that would have been very liberal at that point, very anti-war. And so now all of a sudden, the communist information we were getting 3 times a day, every cell had a speaker in it, okay? And we got propaganda 3 times a day. They were trying to convince us that they were right and we were wrong and that we should help them in the war. But he started agreeing with that because it sounded, I think, just like what he'd been told in college, getting his degree in political science. Well, after a while, it became obvious he was collaborating with the enemy. And so our number 2 guy, Captain Ken Fisher, a person of very strong character, physically, mentally, emotionally, character-wise, very strong. In fact, he was the guy I was flying with when I was shot down. We were both pilots in the F4, and he was the captain in the front seat, and I was the first lieutenant in the back seat. We had pilots in the back seat in the Air Force, F4s, back in the mid-'60s and so on in that time frame. So Ken told us one day when Lieutenant Colonel was out of the cell, he said, he's collaborating with the enemy. I think I should relieve him of command and take over. Will you support me? And Lieutenant Warner and myself both said, yes, that's exactly the thing to do, and we will support you. And so that's what he did. He courageously kicked out a lieutenant colonel, if you can imagine that. I mean, this is mutiny. And if we're wrong, if he's wrong, he's going to be court-martialed. But we knew he was right. And it turned out he was more right than even we knew. As it turned out over the years, the guy continued to collaborate with them. And it's one of the very, very few, less than 5%, probably less than 3% of our people collaborated. So it was great to have him as a role model because, as I said, he was a mentally, physically tough guy, a person of great character. It helped that he had been the New York State wrestling champion in high school and then wrestled 4 years in college because he was mentally tough and physically tough. And to be honest, I looked to him as my role model, and I wanted to be more like him. I wanted to be tougher, like he was. He was tougher than me, and he could go longer under torture than I could, and I wanted to be more like him. So he inspired me. He influenced me to be stronger and to put aside my fears and step into the fire, so to speak, when we had to. Now, we had the code, the American Fighting Man's Code, the Code of Conduct. There's 6 articles about our conduct as being shot down or captured or whatever, and then as prisoners of war. And so our goal was to live up to that and to return home with honor. Well, my organization a few years ago, I said, we need an honor code, and we worked out this honor code, and it's the #1 download on our website. It's free there. There's 7 items there, 7 principles, and they're so basic, and yet I use them as a checklist to remind me of what I stand for and who I am. But you'll notice courage is in the center, because courage is the backbone of all leadership, of all honor and character. It requires courage. Otherwise, like the lieutenant colonel, our doubts and fears will take us out and take us off course. So I encourage you to check that out and download it sometime if you're interested. It's a free download, and we share it as much as we can. Confront your doubts and fears is so important. We had to learn to confront our doubts and fears. Now, I've been a leadership coach and teacher, instructor, trainer, writer for 20 years now, okay? I've worked with CEOs in Fortune 500, Fortune 200 companies and their teams, executives. I've worked with generals and colonels and majors in the Air Force and the military. And most of our issues come down to our doubts and fears. So we had to learn to confront our doubts and fears and lean into the pain. We have a little courage card. It's the same size of a business card. And it says, take the courage challenge. Lean into the pain of your doubts and fears to do what you know is right, even when it doesn't feel safe or natural. Can you imagine what our culture would be like if people did that today? Because once a person gets off course a little bit on their character, what do? Do they admit it and correct back to course? A lot of times they don't, and they get further off course, and then they deny it. And then they defend it. And then they demonize the people that are accusing them. And eventually, sometimes they try to destroy the people, cancel them maybe, if they're guilty. So confronting your doubts and fears will be a big help. We really worked on that there. Well, there was one guy who was a senior ranking officer, and I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about this. We were very isolated at this point. We had almost no communication with any of the cells because there were guards in the hallways out there. And if you got caught communicating, you're probably going to be tortured and put in the Mint or some other isolation place that they might have in the camp. So we had to be very, very careful. Well, one day there was one little window my cell there was on the inside courtyard. The outside wall of the camp is over there where you see the word Thunderbird, and ours was on the inside wall. And it had one little window in it about 10 inches tall and probably about 20 inches wide. And it had bars in it. It was covered with a rattan mat, and you couldn't see out in there. But I, being the sneaky guy that I am, I didn't tell you that that little 6.5 by 7 foot cell had two wooden boards, one on either side of the room, or a set of boards. On one side, it's probably about 26 or 28 inches wide, and the same on the other side, like bunk beds. And then above it was another one and another one fastened to the wall. And there was about a space this wide to walk in between those two, and we took turns walking in it during the day. Well, I climbed up there on that top one day while the guards were at lunch and siesta. They took a siesta, not the guards, but the turnkeys. And the siesta, the guards got loose, lax, because there was nothing going on. And I pushed that rattan mat back so I could see into that cell. And they had opened the shutters on that cell during the siesta hour, and I could see in it. And I saw this face of this old man. He looked really old. And it was this guy. He'd been on the cover of Time magazine in April '65, and he was shot down and captured in September. Now, he had been a POW for 2 years and a couple of months when I got there, and he was the senior ranking officer. He'd flown and was an ace in the Korean War. I think he shot down 6 or 7 communist MiG jets over there in the Korean War. So he was an American hero, but he was a senior ranking POW at that time in the camp. And so I was able to get communication with him. And there's a picture of him back in the Korean War, but his guidance and wisdom was so great. We all loved him as we got to know him. He had been through torture. This is the ropes torture. He'd been tortured a number of times. He'd been beaten. He'd been put in solitary confinement. And when I got contact with him right then, he had just come through 10 months of isolation. Well, he was in solitary most of the time, but he was in total darkness. And he told me later that he was just going crazy. Anxiety attacks were just beyond imagination. Well, we were able to communicate silently. He held up his hand and he started writing A, B, C, D. And I said, I got it. Okay. And then he started writing words, and we communicated for about 6 weeks every day for about 30, 40 minutes during the lunch hour when everything was quieting down. And he passed to me his guidance. Now, the message here is clarify the culture. The culture is one of the most important things a leader has to do. And the leader has to own it. You can't have a culture that the leader doesn't own. I've worked with organizations where the leader did not want to own the culture and define it and live because they didn't want to live by it. He was afraid he couldn't live up to it. He was insecure. Well, 2 years later, he got relieved and fired by the board because he didn't live up to good character. He was doing things that really he shouldn't have been doing. Okay, Reisner's guidance, and he started putting this out in 1965, 2 years before I got there. He says, I'm in charge, and here's what I want you to do. Be a good American, live by the code of conduct. Resist up to the point of permanent physical or mental damage, and then no more. Go ahead and give in, give as little as possible, bounce back because they're going to come after you again. And then stay united through communications. We had covert communications, and we really had to take big risks and work at it hours a day just to get a few messages through. Pray every day, go home proud, return with honor. Our mission, vision, and values were tied up in 3 words: return. We wanted to go home desperately, but with honor. And that was the battle. That was our war. That was the battles that we fought for those years that we were there. I was there 5 years, 4 months, and 2 weeks, 1,955 days. Reisner was there 7.5 years, and my good friend Alvarez was there 8.5 years. He was there 6 months before POW number 2 got there. He was shot down on the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And Ev is about 83 or so today, and what an amazing guy. I'm reading his second book right now, and I'll tell you, it's a wonderful book. Both of them are, but his second one is great. Well, another leader we had there was Commander James Bond Stockdale. They see the MOH, Medal of Honor. Stockdale was a stoic. He was an intellectual. He was a boxer. He was a musician. Very reserved, but yet an incredible leader. And he set a great example for us. His Medal of Honor there is for his leadership and his resistance, mainly his personal resistance to the enemy. They wanted him to make a movie, propaganda movie, and he refused to do it. And so they tortured him, and finally he agreed to do it. And then when they went out of the room, he took the little stool in the room and beat over his head until it was a bloody pulp, so they couldn't use his face in the movie. And first of all, he shaved his hair. They gave him a razor to shave with, and he shaved his head into a reverse mohawk and cut his scalp, and it was bleeding there, and they put a hat on him for that. And then he beat himself up with a pulp. But he resisted all the time. And Stockdale and Reisner and Denton, Commander Denton, these guys were all 05 lieutenant colonel or commander, which is the same as a lieutenant colonel. And they were all in solitary confinement for more than 4 years. They were all there 7.5 years. They're all shot down. These three leaders got there early. They were shot down and captured between July and September of 1965, 2 years, 2 months, and 3-4 months before I got there. Den was tortured many times also. And one time he was tortured to go to a press conference with a Japanese reporter. He didn't know it was going to be a Japanese reporter, but he was a press conference, and he was supposed to say that the American bombing was wrong. He agreed to say that finally, okay, after being tortured. When he gets out there, the Japanese reporter asked him, "What do you think about your country's policy on the bombing?" He said, "Well, I've been here a long time. I don't know what my country's policy is on anything anymore." In your face, basically, you know. They almost dragged him out of there, but they didn't want to lose face. So they let him answer a few more questions. And in front of those old bright lights and the old movie camera, the 1966, when this happened, he was there blinking. TORTURE in Morse code, as you can see on the left there. Well, he blinked it twice. And today, that video is still on the internet. You can put into your browser, type in Denton blinks torture, and you'll see him do that. It's the most incredible, creative, brilliant, courageous act a person could almost ever do. Because if they had caught him in that, I think they would have probably beat him to death and killed him. But he took that risk and he pulled it off. And so he's always been one of our heroes. Amazing thing is, of all the stuff that we went through, those guys are there, those three guys, 7.5 years. And they all lived to be over 80. Stockdale died early at 83 and 82 or 83. And Reisner and Denton lived to be 89 and 90. Can you imagine that? Well, I use this leadership training as our leadership attributes model. You see the bottom part of this model is integrity, trust, character, values-driven, authentic, ethical. That's so important because if you don't have that, people won't trust you. And if they don't trust you, how can you influence them as a leader? So it's so essential. You got to guard your character and work on it every day. And then above that, you see natural talents, your natural talents for either mission or people, either results, relationship. In the corporate world, I call it results, relationship. In the military, I call it mission and people. You've got to do both. Well, here's the problem. Half the problem, 40% of the population, we know now because we do assessments of human behavior. Now, I've been doing this 30 years. 40% of the population is bent toward results or mission. That's their drive, their natural talent. 40% toward people, relationships. That's their natural strength. And 20% have some of both. Well, Denton was more relationship oriented, Stockdale was more results oriented, and Reisner had some of both. But here's the deal, regardless of which way you're wired, you have to do both of those. Because if you don't, people won't be inspired if you don't connect with their hearts, encourage them, acknowledge them, affirm them, believe in them, help them develop. Then they're not going to be able to have the same amount of energy and productivity to accomplish results if you don't do that. But yet it's hard. I get paid money to coach results-oriented leaders on how to give positive feedback and encourage people because they say, yeah, it's not natural. I don't feel safe doing this. Well, you can learn to do it, make it a task and go do it. And sure enough, it works. So it's very important. So I talk about the leadership squeeze. Above you, they're always looking for results. Your board members, if you're the CEO, you're looking for results. That's what gets measured, that results. But people below you are always thinking about, well, what about me? Because we all listen mainly to one radio station, WIFM. What's in it for me? And you better understand that about human nature. We want to feel valued. We want to feel significant. And as a leader, you've got to spend time and energy doing that and do it in a genuine way. You may have to act your way into a new way of feeling, okay? Because it may not feel natural, but you can work into that because your values will tell you it is right. So we call that the leadership balance, your neural seesaw. It's what the neuroscientists now, they call it the neural seesaw. And it's very hard to do both, but you can adapt your behavior. And as a leader, the higher up you go, the more you need to learn to adapt your behavior to do both, to get some balance. You'll never be completely balanced, but to get more balance, because that's what enables you to become a great leader instead of just a good leader. So these three different leadership styles, as I mentioned, amazing guys. We loved them all. They supported each other. They all got beaten down. They didn't live up to their own standards, but when they didn't, they were totally authentic about it. They admitted it. And that set the standard for us to know that if we did our very best, some people are just tougher than others. They can last longer. That's the reality of it. And we did our very best, and that's what we tried to do. So here they are, relationships on one side, results on the other, but they adapted, and that made all the difference in the world. And when you have that kind of the ability, it takes that inner confidence. If you're not comfortable in your own skin, you're going to have trouble doing this, I can tell you. And especially you'll have trouble being both confident and humble, because they're almost paradoxical. But if you really have confidence in yourself, that inner confidence, you're okay to be humble. You're not worried about yourself. You can focus on somebody else and helping them and being honest about yourself. That's where I try to help leaders see. If you can get comfortable yourself, but also as a leader, you want to help your people get more comfortable in themselves. We all have lies about ourselves that we believe. And you help that person get rid of those lies by speaking into their life and say, you know, you're really good. I'm so glad you're on my team. You do this. Really? Yeah, that's really the truth. Well, we had to communicate, and I'm watching my clock here. I'm going to speed up here a little bit. The TAP code, the book came out by Smitty Harris, my cellmate, who brought in the TAP code. It's a 5x5 matrix. A is 1, 1, B is 1, 2. Row first and then column. So if you want to say hi, you go down 2 and over 3 for the H. That'd be boom, 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 boom. And the I would be boom, 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 boom. Well, we practiced a lot. We got really good at it. There's 26 letters in the alphabet. We had to leave out 1, so we left out K and used C. We practiced a lot. We got good at it. And the point is, here as a leader, you have to over-communicate your message. You can't just say it one time and think that's it. You have to over-communicate your message and work at it. And we certainly did that. So communicate to clarify. We were tapping on those walls. You must clarify. You have to collaborate. You have to cover and support your people. You have to connect with them and let them know they're valuable and important. we have a situation in one camp I was in out at Sante where one of my friends, it wasn't my friend at that time, I knew who he was, but I could see him through the crack in the door. He was in another building. He was in solitary confinement. And so he started riding a motorcycle when we went out to the bathhouse or went out to empty his bucket. He would ride an imaginary motorcycle, okay? And he would make noises. He'd go, brrr, brrr. And then he adopted a monkey called Barney. And he would get Barney on the back of his motorcycle and be talking to him and going across the prison yard, and talking to Barney. And we're all just ripping our guts laughing, watching this through the cracks in the doors. But he was trying to make out like he was going crazy and he needed a cellmate because he was in solitary confinement. So he was riding that motorcycle around the yard, and finally they decided to put him in the cell with somebody else, and they put him in with me and 3 other guys. So I lived with Jerry, and he was a very creative guy and great cellmate and great guy. He's retired up in D.C. area now. So exploiting creativity, you got a lot of creative people on your team. You need to tie into that and use their creativity. Leadership always makes a difference, and I just got to mention the ladies what they were doing back home. Well, James Bond, James Bond's lady, that was James Bond Stockdale. This is a kind of a blurry looking picture, but you'll see why Sybil's was such an amazing person. Here's the rest of the story. There's Sybil Stockdale. She's chairman of the National League of POW/MI Families, which she was the first chairman and one of the leader in organizing. And she is telling President Nixon and Henry Kissinger on the right that the government has told us to be quiet, and it's our best interest and our husbands and sons' best interest not to talk about them or the war or anything. And we have been quiet, but it's been 2.5 years, and we know they're not being treated well. And we're not going to be quiet anymore, Mr. President. And so we'd really like you to join us and start basically, I'm putting my words now, raising hell in the press about our treatment, the treatment of our men, and putting pressure on the communists to follow the Geneva Conventions about treatment of POWs. Well, those guys are politicians, and they did not want to be fighting against the POW wives, so they did. They immediately, within 6 weeks, Secretary of Defense Laird was at the podium, beating on the podium, demanding that the communists abide by the Geneva Accords on treatment of POWs. And that cause took off, and thousands of people were wearing bracelets, and they put pressure on them in Paris and all over the world. And there's a book called League of Wives by Heath Lee. I'll tell you all about that. My family got involved. They were speaking to people and working there. A lot of people, I found out when I came home, we didn't know about this, but I came home, over 1,000 people had a bracelet with my name on it, was thinking about me every day, praying for me. And that made all the difference in the world, I think, for us. Their attention really did eventually change our treatment when Ho Chi Minh died in the fall of '69. So I just mentioned develop your people, but I want to move on so we can have some questions. We did eventually, after the Sante raid, we went back into the Hanoi Hilton into big rooms. There were 53 POWs in that cell right there, about 1,800 square feet, no walls inside, just open bay. And we actually organized schools Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. I was studying 3 languages. We had no books. We just had people that knew languages. I was teaching French, intermediate, basic French, and studying intermediate French. And I had 2 guys that I would speak those 3 languages, French, Spanish, and German. I would speak with 10 minutes of each every day, 5 days a week with these 2 other guys, and we got pretty good at it. And the good news is we accomplished our goals of getting fluent. The bad news is we had time to accomplish our goals. We stayed there 2 or 3 more years after that. So we did work through that. And finally, we bounced back. And my group on March the 14th, after the Paris Peace Accords were signed, that's John McCain. I was captured 11 days after John McCain. And we came home on the same bus back to the Gilam Airport and got on the same airplane and flew back together back to the good world. That's Ken Fisher, my leader on the far left, who was in that cell with me. That's me. And then on the far right, that arrow is John McCain. Well, we fought those battles to return with honor, and we did, and came home and celebrated success with our families. They're the real heroes. We knew what was happening to us. They didn't. And I can't imagine what they went through. The Air Force said, "You want to go back to work?" And I said, "Yep." Flying? They said, "Yep." So I requalified and had a great flying career. I was a flight commander or a section commander, and then an ops officer, and then I was a chief check pilot on my base 4 years after I got back, which is unbelievable. And then I was a squadron commander and made colonel, and just had a great career in the Air Force. So that was really special. People say, "How did you do it?" We had faith. You must believe. Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. Faith in God was very important. Faith in ourselves and each other was very important. Faith in our families, faith in our country that someday they'd get us out, and faith that we could and would return with honor. So lessons we talked about: your character, know yourself, guard your character. Courage. You got to confront your doubts and fears. You got to bounce back. You got to be resilient. You got to stay connected, clarify and build your culture, develop your people. I always like to pull in some quotes when I can, and this one comes from Return of the King. You've been chosen for a larger story. You've been given a role to play. If you don't play it, no one else can. Evil is hunting you, insecurity, doubts, and lies. A fellowship desires to protect you. You must stay connected. I'm so glad that you all are connected, because this helps protect your honor. It helps you develop. It helps you grow. It really helps you to become the person that you can be when you're connected with people who are like-minded, and in some areas are better than you. In some ways you're better than them, but you're encouraging and developing each other along the way. So encourage in that battle. There's no freedom without sacrifice. There's no victory without loss, and there's no glory without suffering. That's from the Return of the King also. Think about it. There's no glory without suffering. We POWs agree with that. And I want to add one more. There's no honor without courage. Without courage, your doubts and fears will take you out. And with that, I'm ready for questions. We have free tools. I'll come back to a minute. I'm going to stop share. If I can find a place to stop sharing here. I got to drag this out of the way. Okay. We got a few minutes for questions.
Wow, that was a lot. That's a lot to absorb right there. That's a lot of experiences in just under an hour. Let's go to Drew. I know Drew has some questions.
I think I put him to sleep.
No, sir, you didn't. Not at all. So I've talked about this whole idea of allowing your experiences to define the person you need to be, as opposed to consume the person you are. And it's fascinating. And I have been blessed through some of the Duty Honor Country series things I received as a young cadet to talk to various Medal of Honor recipients throughout my life, but also men from the Hanoi Hilton and the experiences that you all had there. It is very humbling. The challenge or the question I ask is because of some of my own experiences from combat and those things. How did this physical and mental discipline and adversity that you went through while in the service and at Hanoi Hilton, how did that affect you in terms of defining the person you needed to be in terms of team expectations in business? Because one is so extreme.
Yeah.
When there's a problem in business, it's pretty insignificant to some of the problems you faced in your life and deaths and struggles. So yeah. I'm curious how you managed to balance those and what you learned from those things.
Yeah. I think you have to, everything in leadership comes down to being both results, mission, which means you have to know how to set standards and be tough. Okay. You have to know how to be tough. You have to set standards. You have to hold people accountable. When I say be tough, I don't mean beat them with a stick. I mean, lay down the law. And when they get out of bounds and not doing their job, or they're got a bad attitude, you have to sit down and talk and say, this is not working. Let's see, find out why. And then you start tightening the belt, so to speak, or tightening the gears until they either get on track or the accountability falls big on their head and they're gone or whatever. So you have to be tough, but you also have to be very caring. And sometimes, for certain people, for different reasons, it's hard to be caring, but you have to have that value. And I think instilled in us in the POW camps with the value of every human being, and that even our enemy, we knew they were human beings. And so we look for things in them that were good. And we try to remember that today, so we won't get hung up in bitterness. We wanted to come home and not be bitter. So we actually worked at that. The last couple of years, when the torture stopped and the treatment got better, we started trying to prepare ourselves to go home. And like I say, part of that was to be honest about ourselves and work on ourselves, but also part of that was to not be bitter. I think valuing other human beings is an essential piece of teamwork and leadership, because when somebody knows that you value them and you really care about them, you can be tough with them. I mean, that's exactly what a parent does. A parent gives unconditional love, but better be setting boundaries and holding them accountable, or you get the victimhood. And the biggest problem in America today is the school system. And what's wrong with the school system? Well, if teachers try to hold the students accountable, the parents come swooping down with, why did you do this? Because parents, they listen to their kids instead of holding them accountable and teach them. So you got to have accountability. You got to have both the caring and the tough. And when you can do that, you're a great teammate and a great leader. So I would say that's the best thing. And so I think I came home, and everybody, my teammates, we came home, we knew who we wanted to be and what we wanted to stand for, and we were ready to go to battle to live to that. And I think that's one reason we've had good marriages. Those of us who were married and stayed married, I wasn't, those who came back and were divorced right away, and they remarried. And myself, I came home single. I met my wife a year after we got back, and we got married. We knew right away it was the right one. I dated a lot of girls, but when I met her, and we sat down and tried to dissect what really brought us together. And I think a big part of it was character. I recognized in her strong character that was attractive to. She was beautiful, but I dated a lot of beautiful girls, but she had character, and that was attractive to me. And she saw that in me, I think. So the value system is so important. People want to be around somebody who's got strong values. And I just think that's the kind of teamwork you want. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. It's a challenge we all face. I say it that way. I'm so glad to hear the values that the military and your experiences taught you has been passed on in a torch to a lot of our young servicemen and women over the time. And this tough love thing is a challenge in the business world because people don't like when you're tough.
Well, I have a list of things that I have when you work for me. There's 8 things on that list, 8 items. And when we have our meeting, I go over them and I say, if you work for me, this is what you need to know. I'm willing to listen to any ideas you have. It's okay to confront me. I'm not afraid of being confronted. I enjoy being confronted because a lot of times the important things I learn are from somebody who confronts me. I'm a logical person, so I don't have weak feelings about being confronted. If you disagree, get in here and tell me. But I'm going to listen to you, and then if you don't convince me to your side, then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, and you better suck it up and go do it, or you go find somewhere else. Because if you don't support me, then you're against me. You got to be loyal to me, and I'll take responsibility. If it fails, it's my fault, not your fault. So I just tell people right up front, we're going to do things a certain way. And some younger people, you're going to have to coach them a little bit. Yeah, because they haven't been raised that way probably, but you just have to work on it and bring them in step by step into that whole idea of accountability and ownership. I think the biggest issues to help our younger people with right now are ownership, responsibility, and accountability, and helping them see that things don't work without that. And you look at Navy SEALs, fighter pilots, or anything that's successful in life, in real situations, you've got to have that. So I think that's it. I see a question here from Steve Johns. He says, have you been back to Vietnam? Yes. In 2014, I speak on cruises some. I did before COVID. I was invited by Crystal Cruises to go on an Asian cruise. So we flew to Hong Kong and got on the ship and left and went from there over to Ha Long Bay and went to Hanoi, spent a full day in Hanoi, and went to the Hanoi Hilton, had lunch as guests of the Hilton Enterprise at the Hilton Hanoi. And then after lunch, we went down to the Hanoi Hilton, the Hua Lo prison, and toured that. And some of it was the same, and some of it was, they have a museum there, and the museum is all photo op propaganda full of lies. I mean, it's true that picture was real, but that wasn't the way we lived. That was a once a year meal or one little group of people that got to play volleyball for 2 weeks, and all the photos for that. So yes, I've been back. And then I went to Da Nang, where I was based. And then I went down to Saigon and spent a couple of days in Saigon. And here's what I'll say. Every day that goes by, we're winning that war. They like Americans. They tolerate the Russians, and they hate the Chinese. And they don't like communists. So it's, I think it's all coming together. My light sensor went out. Timer went out. It's all coming together, and we enjoyed going back to Vietnam. We love Vietnamese people. So it was a good experience.
I want to go over to Adam, who I think just wants to say thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As I'm fascinated by leadership, and I've been doing this for a little while, but not near as long as most. And I find myself, my generation doesn't have these extreme challenges that your generation and the World War II generation went through. And it's just so inspiring to hear your stories of courage and leadership and how you faced the adversity you did, and then not only faced it, but then made a life out of impacting others through your lessons. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm most of the time I feel pretty young, but I am an old person. I'm a senior citizen. Okay. But I just believe that I think it's kind of like when Ronald Reagan got shot and that bullet missed his heart by a quarter of an inch. And he said, well, I think I'm spared because God's got something else for me to do. And I feel like I'm on a mission with a message. And that's why I work. I don't have to work. I got free retirement income, so I could retire on Social Security, military, and I've forgotten what the other one is. And I got some retirement saved up too. But I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I love doing what I do. I just feel like it's the right place. And I do need to cut back a little bit, but I will tell you, I'll take 30 seconds to tell you about, I'm working on a new book. It's totally different than anything you would ever imagine. But a few years ago at our reunions, and as we got together, I started hearing some of these amazing stories of how my guys met their wives or came home and divorced and met somebody, or a lot of them are married and been married 60, 61, 62 years now. And their stories of their marriages and all are just so incredible. So I came up with this idea of getting some POW stories, romance stories. So I'm working on a new book called Captured by Love, the amazing, we changed it, the inspiring romance stories of the Vietnam POWs. And so I got 20 of them right now. We're going to have 20 chapters, plus or minus a couple. 20 of them right now. We're working on the stories. There'll be one chapter per story. And these lessons are just, and the stories are incredible. I mean, just incredible how people met and fell in love like in a minute or in an hour, fell in love, and they've been married 45, 46, 47 years now. You know, it's just amazing. But there's so many good lessons in that. It's not going to be a teaching book, but the lessons will be threaded through there, each one. So anyway, that's my new that's a sidebar I'm working on in addition to my regular job and running a company and speaking and writing and training. So anyway,
one of the things.
Oh, I didn't tell you that. So I'm a year back, and I'm at the club on Friday night, and this two ladies walk in, and I spot one of them, and I tell this lieutenant at the bar, I said, I got to go meet her and dance with her, and I did. And so we got married a few months later, and we've been married 46 years. And she is the best. And fortunately, she's a licensed counselor and a marriage therapist, so that's helped a lot. I'm a slow learner.
One of the things that seems like we have lost the capacity for the last couple of years is to disagree agreeably. And one of the things you put out that I used a number of times last year, and I want to bring it up here, is the can you see that? The courage. Talk a little bit about, because I really loved what this represented for thinking about some of there were several times last year where people would be caught up in the anxiety of the election and social issues and fighting each other. And I would pull this out and read it.
Yeah, this is the courage card I mentioned. It's the size of a business card. So if you fold that in half, that's a piece of paper you can download from our website. It's free also. Or you can order them 10 for $3 or something. But it's on one side is the courage challenge. I mentioned that above. And the one on the bottom is what we call the leadership engagement model. If you look below at the motions on the bottom, the right side emotions and the left side emotions are the same: fear, anger, distrust, pride, and hubris. They're the same on both sides. So some of us naturally under pressure, when we get angry or afraid, we try to dominate, and others of us try to withdraw. And some of us who try to dominate, if we can't dominate, then we withdraw. Well, that just doesn't work very well. Okay, it'll work well for a few minutes, and maybe in wartime, yes, it worked. But in day-to-day life, it doesn't work. And you have to learn to engage, and that takes positive emotions. You have to flip it over, and you have to believe, okay, I got to engage. I got to get in this thing. And listen, I've worked with, let's say, a hospital where they're working with clinics of doctors out here, and they're competing in some ways, but yet they absolutely have to work together. And so I help them see you have to learn to engage. And what would it look like if you engage? What would it take for you to engage, to sit down and dialogue, to work through this, and to, have hope and believe in this and work through it? And when they do, it's amazing how successful they are together. And yet they may have been dominating and withdrawing and fighting for the last 10 years, and you get them to engage and work through it, it changes the world. This is what great leaders and teammates do, is they help people come together, sit down and work through it. And that's what we need in our country today.
Well, I feel like listening to you that despite all of the challenges we face, that you're still pretty optimistic.
Yeah, I am. My faith is important. And sometimes when I start to get a little too stressed out, I just have to stop and say, wait a minute, there's only certain things I can do. Okay, this is my responsibility. That over there is somebody else's or God's responsibility. And I don't have to worry about it. I just got to do what I can do and stay positive in that way and take care of that. The one thing I wanted to mention, earlier that I mentioned earlier. When we had our 40th reunion down in San Antonio, 40th anniversary of freedom, in 2013, we came home in 73, 40 years. We're sitting around a table, and there's we have these big lounges where we sit and talk and visit and have a drink and sit and visit with our buddies. And there's 6 or 7 or 8 of us around the table. And one of the guys, and they're all retired. I was the youngest guy by far, and yours with my age was probably 5 or 6 years older than me. So they're all in their 80s, probably. And one of the guys said, you know, I would never volunteer to be a POW, but I wouldn't change a thing. And everybody at that table agreed. We wouldn't want to go through that again, but we wouldn't change a thing because we came home better men. You recall I said, without suffering, there's no glory. You have to make the best of your suffering. You have an opportunity to grow in suffering in ways you would never have in good times. We don't grow much in good times. We're just celebrating. But in suffering, we can grow. And I think that was one of the lessons we learned. We came home better men. We've had good marriages and great careers since then because of that terrible experience.
You know, one last question I want to get in. And I've taken a little bit of this from your book, but I've always said the worst time to prepare for an ethical dilemma is when you're in the middle of it. You usually have prepared what kind of person you're going to be in advance and what your boundaries are. What do you think, you know, as you reflect back on your time and the folks that were with you, what helped prepare you for how you would respond in that time of adversity and those ethical dilemmas?
I think you have to, first of all, clarify what your values are, what is okay and what's not okay. Well, because of my home where I grew up, my community where I was raised, my faith and my religious training, my military training. I can remember being an ROTC student trying to get being indoctrinated into the Arnold Air Society, which is like the social group of ROTC, and standing up my back against the wall in the building, academic building where ROTC was, and this upperclassman in my face chewing me out, give me Article 5 to the Code of Conduct. And I had to have it memorized and spit it back out. So we had memorized that code. And that's why we developed that honor code I showed you. And I really encourage you to get that honor code and then develop your own, but use that as a starting point maybe. When you have an honor code that you know, you've clarified what you believe in and what you stand for, then you can coach yourself to live that way. You can correct when you get off base, just like they're flying. When you get off course, you have to correct back quickly. If you're flying formation, you get out of position, you have to correct back quickly. And so having that clarity about I will tell the truth. I will show people respect. I will treat people with respect. You know, sometimes I have to coach myself on that one because I can be pretty blunt sometimes, and it feels disrespectful to people who are different from me. So having that clarity about what you believe and what's honorable and what's not. And then the other thing is you have to have clarity about your values. You have to have people around you that can help you think things through when you have to make hard business decisions. Does this pass the smell test? Because when your emotions get involved, you can start rationalizing very quickly and saying, "Oh, it's probably okay. It'll be okay." And when some of your buddies, you run it by them, and they say, "Nah, I don't think that's a good idea." That's what's helped me. That being able to be accountable and have buddies and teammates that will help me stay on track.
Well, this has been awesome. I really love everything you've shared with us today. It's been inspiring, and it just makes sense. You haven't said anything that's that hard to do. It's just things we don't remind ourselves of.
I will just say, I battle this every day. This is a battle. I coach myself. I work to live up to that code, to be a good husband, to be a good father, grandfather, neighbor. It's work. I'm a human being, you know. I'm an ornery SOB in a lot of ways, so I have to work at it. And if you're not working at it, you're probably off course. I think you have to work at it. I recommend a great book by a guy named Gus Lee. He taught it there at West Point. It's called Courage, the Backbone. I think the backbone of leadership. Courage, the backbone, Gus Lee. It's a good book about courage, the requirement for courage to really stick with, you won't be able to stick with your values and your integrity without courage.
The website is leadingwithhonor.com.
Mm-hmm.
Folks can find more of your work there and see about the books.
Yep, and we have a new online course based around the Blue Book that we'd love to. There's information on that on there too, but a lot of stuff. There's a lot of free stuff there. Go get the free stuff first, and then if you want to do something else, that'd be great too.
I did a walkthrough of that online course with Eddie Williams, and that looks powerful.
Yeah. It's online, but it's collaborative, and we have team meetings for every module of it. So it's been great. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us today, and thanks for continuing to share your story.
My pleasure, and all the best to all of you. God bless you all.
All right, everyone have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent.